And let me be very frank, and not everybody will agree with me, but I think that Donald Trump is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. And it's not just because he lies all the time. It's not just because he doesn't believe in science. It's not just because he's a racist or a sexist or a homophobe or a xenophobe. It is because he is quite intentionally trying to undermine American democracy, trying to suppress the vote. We are a democratic society. People have fought and died to defend our democracy. And we cannot reelect a president who does not believe in the rule of law, our Constitution, or in fact, a democracy.
Although the election is November 3rd, and it's been said that we won't know the results until days later. When do you think we'll know the results?
All right. Jimmy, you raise an important point, and I hope the American people understand it, because this is something I worry about. My view is every vote must be counted. For reasons which I don't have the time to get into tonight, you're going to have a situation, I suspect, in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, other states, where they are going to be receiving huge amounts of mail-in ballots. And unlike states like Florida or Vermont, they're not being able, for bad reasons, to begin processing those ballots until, I don't know, election day, or maybe when the polls close. That means you're going to have states dealing with perhaps millions of mail-in ballots. Here is my worry. What polls show and what studies have shown is that for whatever reason, Democrats are more likely to use mail-in ballots. Republicans are more likely to walk into polling booths on election day. It is likely that the first votes that will be counted will be those people who came in on election day, which will be Republican. And here is the fear, and I hope everybody hears that. It could well be, and I don't know what's going to happen, nobody does, but it could well be that at 10 o'clock on election night, Trump is winning in Michigan, he's winning in Pennsylvania, he's winning in Wisconsin, and he gets on the television and he says, "Thank you, Americans, for re-electing me. It's all over. Have a good day." But then the next day and the day following, all of those mail-in ballots start getting counted, and it turns out that Biden has won those states. At which point Trump says, "See, I told you the whole thing was fraudulent. I told you those mail-in ballots were crooked, and we're not going to leave office."
We have so many. We had such a big night. You just take a look at all of these states that we've won tonight, and then you take a look at the kind of margins that we've won them by. And all of a sudden, it's not like we're up 12 votes and we have 60% left. We won states, and all of a sudden, I said, "What happened to the election? It's off." And we have all these announcers saying, "What happened?" And then they said, "Oh," because you know what happened? They knew they couldn't win. So they said, "Let's go to court." And did I predict this, Newt? Did I say this? I've been saying this from the day I heard they were going to send out tens of millions of ballots. I said exactly, because either they were going to win, or if they didn't win, they'll take us to court.
So I wanted to make a few basic points about the mail-in ballots. First of all, they all have barcode and serial number on them so that they can all be traced to an actual registered voter. The only loophole I see with them is if someone mails in a signed ballot and leaves certain fields blank, which can be filled in later on by an election staff worker. However, the amount of these types of ballots should be minimal. Due to the fact that the mail-in ballots appeared to be mostly for Biden, this created the impression that the Democrats were stuffing ballots the day after the election. However, it does in fact appear that most of the mail-in ballots are in fact for Biden. Now we'll show this later in the video.
You can drop it off at your local elections office. Look for other drop boxes at places like city halls, libraries, and community centers. Your registrar of voters office likely provided a list with your ballot. If you can't drop off your ballot yourself and must mail yours in, consider sending it early to ensure it arrives in time. The Santa Clara County Registrar says your voted ballot must be received by the Registrar of Voters by 8 p.m. on Election Day, or must be postmarked on or before Election Day and received within 17 days of the election.
Because no matter where you live, the ballot will include a set of instructions. Here in San Mateo County, it is 1, 2, 3. That's fill out the ballot and tear off the receipt.
The actual stub for your records.
And then the step that is most likely to get your vote disqualified. If you do not sign your envelope, your ballot will be rejected.
Last election, we had over 4,000 challenged ballots. Of those 4,000, 2,000 were no signature on the ballots.
So here's the mail-in ballot with the serial number, barcode, and signature there. All of these are traceable so that they can be tracked in a lawsuit. One thing I think Taiwan commentators are missing is the fact that in Taiwan, there are no serial numbers, barcodes, or signatures on the ballots. Once a ballot is introduced by the election staff during the counting process, it's a valid ballot. We have no idea where it came from. They could have just put it in the box if they wanted to. They can grab it from another source if they want to. It's not legal, but it was done on January 11th. Ballots were coming in from out of nowhere. In the United States, for these mail-in ballots, all of the physical ballots can be traced. All the ballots in the computer system can be traced to a physical ballot like this. So what I'm saying is the US election is designed to prevent fraud, whereas the Taiwan process is designed so that the Central Election Commission can commit fraud. They don't want to leave any kind of tracking measures on the ballots because then they cannot print extra ballots and stuff as many as they feel like it. The Taiwan election process is a joke and it was exploited very easily by the Tsai administration in January.
大家好啊！今天的美国总统大选呢，出现了一个惊天的大逆转。在两个非常关键的摇摆州密西根州和威斯康星州啊，在昨天凌晨的时候呢，突然停止了计票。那么在停止计票之前，川普是大幅度的领先。早上6点钟左右的时候啊，这两个州啊，相继以同样的方式又恢复了这个重新计票，然后又出现了同样的一个结果，就是 Joe Biden 的这个选票啊，突然大幅的增加，在图表中显示出了一个断崖式的直线上升，而且这个直线上升呢，几乎是纯一边倒的。那么这个过程呢，就出现了一个让很多人不能接受的两件事情：第一，你为什么要暂停选票？第二，为什么会突然大量的出现了一边倒的选票？于是啊，很多人就认为啊，这种情况非常有可能存在选举舞弊或者作弊的情况。那么可能有人认为说，那这个很正常啊，因为之前说支持这个邮寄选票的都是民主党的嘛，不支持邮寄选票的都是共和党的嘛，所以后来开的这个邮寄选票啊，全都是民主党拜登的，这不是很正常吗？从这个图表的数据中我们可以看到，即使邮寄选票大多数都是民主党拜登的，那也不可能说完全没有川普的选票，其实也是会有相当一大群数量的人，就是相对比较理性的支持川普的这些人，他们也会用邮寄选票的方式。那么你说他就一定会听川普的，因为川普说了不能那个邮寄选票，我就不会，我觉得这种可能性很小。我认为相当一大部分支持川普的人也会使用邮寄选票的方式。在1957年台北市长选举的时候，也多次出现了这个停电的情况。1960年彰化县长选举的时候，也发生了这个停电的现象。这两次选举停电呢，最终都被证实存在了从中舞弊的情况。停电呢，其实也就是暂停开票的一种方式。重新恢复计票的时候，又会出现对不利那一方大幅度的票数的增加。
Leonard is a popular YouTube channel run by a mainlander who I would classify as one that is against the Chinese Communist Party and allied with the DPP party in Taiwan. He just mentioned a few elections in Taiwan where the vote count stopped and then the ruling KMT party went ahead after the vote counting started again. However, he didn't mention two bigger elections that the DPP allegedly and probably stole in the presidential election in 2000 and 2004, where the vote count stopped on TV and then it started again. So his commentary on the US election in 2020 is that the mail-in ballots couldn't possibly all be for Biden. He thinks that the stoppage in Michigan and Wisconsin is suspicious. As I've already gone through in my previous video, the final results in those two states are well within what the polls predicted and are comparable to what happened in 2016. The election simply shifted towards the Democrats in most states, or the support rate stayed about the same. So here are the results for the state of New York from 2000 to 2020. The support rate for the Democratic and Republican parties are fairly similar throughout the years. There isn't a great deal of change. This is why I believe that the 2020 election results are fairly normal. So you can see here that the support rate for both sides stay about the same. Democratic candidates usually get around 4 to 4.5 million. Republican candidates get about 2.5 to 3 million. I've been following the New York results for a while now, and I've noticed that Trump got close to his total quite some time ago, very early on in the process, whereas Biden was around 3.5 million before, and he keeps getting more and more ballots as they come in. This suggests that the mail-in ballots are predominantly for Biden. When the ballots in New York are finally counted, Biden should have at least 4.5 million to 5 million, whereas Trump should have just over 3 million. With 16% of the ballots left to be counted, this suggests that they're almost entirely for Biden. I would say 9-1. Therefore, I would say what happened in Michigan and Wisconsin with the mail-in ballots was reasonable.
就在密西根的底特律市，它的这个开票现场啊，工作人员呢用巨大的白板把开票现场的这个玻璃啊去把它挡住。为什么要挡住呢？开票站的外面啊有很多人拿手机啊在监督开票的现场，或者说提出质疑啊或者怎么样。那么可能有人说啊，他们是为了防止说进一步发生什么矛盾，所以他们会采取这种做法。首先，他们这些在外面的人并没有那些暴力或者失控的这种行为出现，而且外面呢还有警察在执勤，在维护秩序。那么你内部的这个工作人员，你如果说是嫌他们的声音太吵了，你拿白板把它堵住，你并不能挡住声音啊。那你把白板挡住的话，唯一能够挡住的就是光线，就是别人能看到的东西。你这样子的话，我也相信你这样挡的话，其实是挡不住什么东西的。但是你这种做法恰恰是激化了矛盾。如果你清清白白的去挡它干什么？那你唯一能够挡住的就是别人在监督你，你把它全部挡起来，这算什么？这叫暗箱操作，这就不叫公开操作了。会有人啊，他会说啊，你这些东西不能作为证据啊，不能拿到法庭上去啊。我们所在的这个世界就是这样的，大家其实都会知道，现实就是这么残酷。
Now, a common misunderstanding that Taiwan commentators have on the US election is that the ballot counting process is supposed to be open to the public. As far as I know, the ballot counting process in the US has never been open to the public. They basically count the ballots with observers and police around them like that, but it's not totally open to the public. Therefore, for them to board up the windows like that is basically because they were being harassed. At the end of the day, what happened in Detroit by no means suggests that election fraud took place in this vote counting center. You would have to investigate the ballots that were counted in this area at that time in order to make this allegation. You can't just say, oh, they boarded up the windows, therefore they were cheating. US elections have to be judged by the US standards, and Taiwan elections have to be judged by Taiwan standards. If this happened in Taiwan, then it would definitely suggest fraud.
Trump is doing right now everything in order to avoid an election loss. There are people on the Republican Party, including notable senators such as Lindsey Graham, saying that this election was rigged, saying that there were irregularities when they haven't provided substantial proof of it. You know, just because you point out that there was a sudden jump in terms of the numbers, I really don't think you should be using that as evidence, just because the ballots that came in typically split 80-20 for Biden, especially in areas like Milwaukee and Detroit and Philadelphia. And when you think about what that actually does for President Trump, this sort of removes credibility. If there isn't any proven voter fraud, this is going to negatively reflect. If you support President Trump, this is going to negatively reflect on President Trump. If there is no proof provided, you know, we've seen the courts strike down his cases because he has failed to provide notable evidence.
Yeah, let's actually tick through the states because the margins are important. And in the state of Pennsylvania, which CNN has already called for Joe Biden, it's what put him over the top, 270 electoral votes. You'll notice Joe Biden's lead has only served to expand over the course of the last couple of days, currently at 45,000 vote lead. And the reality is this, Aaron, there's about 50,000 votes outstanding in Pennsylvania right now, and 20,000 plus of them come from Democratic strongholds of Philadelphia and Allegheny County. So the expectation right now in the state of Pennsylvania, despite the lawsuits, despite anything else, is that Joe Biden's lead is going to grow. I want to flick down to Georgia real quick, too, because it's a similar story. Right now, Joe Biden's up by about 11,414 votes. That's an expanding lead over the course of the last several days. And the reality, when you look at Georgia, when you look at what's outstanding, which is not very much at all, this will go to a recount. But Joe Biden is going into a recount with a pretty significant cushion. Recounts don't flip 10,000 votes or more. They might flip 100 here or 100 there. Joe Biden is in good shape in the state of Georgia.
Attorney General Bill Barr has ordered the Justice Department to look into allegations of voter fraud. To be clear, there have been no credible allegations of fraud that would affect the outcome of the election in any of the states. None. This is happening at a pure spite. Trump's like the guy who puts 20 plays of Achy Breaky Heart on the jukebox before he leaves the diner. Okay?
They say there was voter fraud, and there are ongoing lawsuits and calls for recounts in key swing states. If only the U.S. had elections like Taiwan, where anyone can go watch the votes be counted, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess right now.
America Uncovered is a spin-off of China Uncensored, which is a Falun Gong-backed show. Definitely more on them later because they came to Taiwan to observe the presidential election on January 11th and definitely saw things that they should have reported, but they didn't report them because it didn't back up their narrative. China Uncensored is definitely helping the Falun Gong back up the illegal Tsai administration. America Uncovered and all Falun Gong channels are on full attack trying to promote the election fraud theory that Biden rigged the election. This is not necessarily because they are right-wing or conservative or something like that. This has everything to do with the fact that they are using Trump to attack the Chinese Communist Party. Trump has many allies around the world because of his stance against the Chinese Communist Party.
Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger says the state will have a manual hand recount of ballots for the November 3rd election amid allegations of voter fraud, mismanagement, and irregularities.
With the margin being so close, it will require a full by-hand recount in each county.
He said the state will work with county officials to finish the recount before the state's November 20th deadline.
This will help build confidence. It will be an audit, a recount, and a recanvass all at once. It will be a heavy lift, but we will work with the counties to get this done in time for our state certification.
When results from the hand recount are certified, the losing campaign can then request another recount, which will be done by machine. According to Raffensperger, Democratic candidate Joe Biden leads President Trump by about 14,000 votes. He says so far 97 counties in Georgia have sent in the final numbers. Raffensperger says the Trump campaign had requested a hand recount, and he says his office has been investigating any reports of irregularities.
My office will continue to investigate each and every instance of illegal voting.
The numbers of ballots that they're talking about, if they're even talking about specific ballots at all, are minuscule. 53 votes here, a couple hundred votes there. Number two, they just don't have the proof. You just laid it out perfectly. They're claiming voter fraud. They haven't won a single case. Look, the record speaks for itself. They've filed cases all across this country. They haven't won a single piece of litigation yet. They are winless. They're like the New York Jets of constitutional litigation. The record speaks for itself. They're not turning around anytime soon.
He won because the election was rigged. No vote watchers or observers allowed, vote tabulated by a radical left, blah, 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 more unfounded lies about voter fraud and nonsense. But the point here is he admitted that Biden won. Now, later, he ended up backpedaling a little bit, arguing, by the way, this morning that he won the election in all caps. But Trump also later said that Biden only won in the eyes of the fake news media. But in reality, an increasing number of GOP lawmakers are speaking out and saying, no, it's not looking good. Biden won. Sorry. Now, meanwhile, federal judges are growing increasingly frustrated with the Trump campaign and the frivolous lawsuits that they've been filing in key battleground states.
Now that's now happening to a key allegation in a Trump Pennsylvania lawsuit, which is dropping the claim that hundreds of thousands of ballots should have been tossed because of how they were monitored. Now voters in 4 other key states who had alleged voter fraud are dropping their lawsuits. This is a continuing trickle of courtroom failures that have been tied together by the visage of this man, Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani, who's now supposed to lead some sort of new litigation, but will work independent of the Trump campaign's formal legal operation, which even Republicans admit is another sign that Trump is giving up on the formal attempt to win cases and instead turning to a TV lawyer who could just use the theme of court as a foundation for these theatrics.
For the good of this nation, this is a very big moment. This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay?
We saw votes come in because they were being counted after the election day vote. I don't think people realize that. The state legislatures decided that the mail-in vote was to be counted after the election day vote. So of course Biden is going to gain numbers after the early election day vote. I really just don't understand why we are even having this discussion. Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States. And while President Trump will likely try to go into numerous lawsuits suing different election officials if he doesn't get his way the first time, at the end of the day, the results will likely be the same. Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States of America.
I must say I'm happy to see the emergence of Epoch Times and other conservative news organizations, because I don't have definitive proof of this, but it seems as though money is printed and circulated among a ruling class, and it seems like media organizations are taken over to deliver the same narrative. And I've noticed that there are things that are not covered, whether that be Benghazi during the Obama re-election campaign, whether that be the Hunter Biden computer. It's like you're watching two different worlds. If you're watching CNN and MSNBC, you're not aware of the other side of the argument, and that's very problematic. And so I believe that the public there's a ruse going on.
But when you're looking at the election, these media sources also are very telling as to whether or not there actually is voter fraud. Because do you know how many people would tune in if there actually was evidence of voter fraud? Do you know how many people would have all of these various news sources up all at once just to see a differing opinion on the potential idea of voter fraud? Fox News would not have called this race if they actually thought there was something out. They would not have. This is not some media conspiracy against Donald Trump, because they would benefit from a voter fraud situation. Absolutely. Monetary wise, everything. They would have a lot more time to cover this election. And they drew it along. The vote count took a long time, and they drew it along for 6 days, really. 5 days till we called the presidential election. And this issue of voter fraud would be a very good story for the press. But it just simply is not true. And that is the reason why they're not running it.
It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment. And we will win this. And as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it. So I just want to thank you.
Mary, do you think your uncle genuinely believes that the election was rigged, or is this just all for show?
The interesting thing about Donald is that he starts off with a lie, because there's no way that he can admit this loss, because it's a loss he can't get out of. He can't buy his way out of it. There's nobody to help him out of it in any way. So he has to put out the big lie, which, appeases his supporters. But over time, I think he actually comes to believe his own hype. He is, in some ways, the only person I've ever known who can actually gaslight himself. So the longer this fiction goes on, I think the more he buys into it and the more he clings to it. He's pretty desperate right now.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because in business, as you say, he can get away with spinning events. But in politics, when you lose big. Most politicians have experienced this before. He hasn't. How do you think he's coping with it mentally?
I don't think he's coping with it at all, honestly. I think deep down, he's quite terrified because, again, this is a situation he cannot change. He's looking at some very serious potential charges that he may have to face because he will no longer be protected by the power of his office. More than that, though, I'm guessing right now he's quite enraged. He's enraged because he's feeling trapped, and he's enraged because he lost decisively to President-elect Biden, and the Republican Party actually fared pretty well, at least, compared to expectations. So he has nobody but himself to blame. And of course, since he can't blame himself, he's looking for other scapegoats, and he's probably not at all happy at the moment.
So what do Trump and Taiwan have in common? Both of them will face prosecution when they step down. This is why both of them could not afford to lose their re-elections in 2020. Taiwan was able to rig her election with the support of the Trump administration on January 11th, but Trump was not able to get himself re-elected and it looks like his antics aren't going to work. Even if the DPP party stays in power after she steps down from office one day, Taiwan could still be prosecuted with criminal charges. This is why she will not go quietly. Dictatorship is the only path she can take to keep herself from being prosecuted and possibly going to jail. In our next video, we will look at some of the reasons why Tsai could be prosecuted after she steps down one day, and why she can never step down.